In October 2011, the world was glued to its screens, watching as history seemed to unfold before our eyes. Muammar Gaddafi, the tyrant who ruled Libya with an iron fist for over 4 decades, was dead. The people cheered, believing they had earned their freedom. The West hailed it as a triumph of democracy, a dictator toppled, and a new dawn for Libya. But that's not the whole story. Fast forward 14 years, and Libya isn't a shining beacon of democracy. It is a chaotic war zone split between competing militias and warlords. The once promised freedom has transformed into a nightmare. Migrants are bought and sold in slave markets. Foreign mercenaries fight for control, and the country's future lies in ruins. So what went wrong? This isn't just a tale of regime change gone wrong. It's a story of how a foreign intervention led by the US and NATO doomed Libya to its current fate. The intervention that was meant to liberate the Libyan people ended up destroying their chance for peace. A single decision made by then President Barack Obama set in motion a chain of events that spiraled into disaster. Libya didn't just fall into chaos, it was pushed. From NATO bombs to shattered institutions, the country was left without a plan for what came next. And now, as the world watches in horror, Libya's collapse has rippled across the region. Arms are smuggled, terror groups flourished, and Africa's darkest past is creeping back into the present. To truly grasp the tragedy of Libya's fall, we must trace its origin back to a time long before the modern chaos. A time where Libya wasn't even a unified state. For centuries, it was a patchwork of regions. Tripolitania in the west, Cyrenaica in the east, and Fezzan to the south. This fractured land was a key prize in the North African trade route, burrowed strategically along the Mediterranean. But the Ottomans weren't the last to claim Libya as their own. That's where Italy, an empire hungry for expansion, came in. In 1911, the King of Italy, confident of his destiny, landed in Libya, greeted by Marshal Badoglio, a man whose fame would soon skyrocket. Italy invaded, painting their conquest as a birth of a new Roman Empire, never minding the people already living there. For many years, Italy transformed Libya into a settler colony, forcibly removing the local population to make room for thousands of Italian migrants. The indigenous Bedouins, unwilling to surrender their land, rose up in defiance. And into this storm stepped a man who would become the face of resistance, Muammar Gaddafi, the lion of the desert. Muammar Gaddafi led a fierce guerrilla war against the Italians, fighting in the unforgiving desert of Cyrenaica for nearly 20 years. His name became synonymous with resistance, but in 1931, after a bloody battle, he was captured and executed. His death didn't extinguish his spirit. In revenge, Mussolini's regime enacted brutal reprisals, sending entire communities into concentration camps, where starvation and disease claimed tens and thousands of lives. The dream of freedom seemed utterly crushed, yet history has a strange way of turning the tide. Italy, as powerful as it seemed, would not hold Libya forever. As World War II raged across the globe, Libya became the battleground for a brutal clash of powers. The British Eighth Army squared off against the Axis forces, including the Italian and German armies, in what would become the Seventh Battle of Libya. Cities crumbled, and entire communities were torn apart as bombs rained down. But when the smoke cleared and the fighting ceased, Italy was out of the picture, defeated. The Allies had emerged victorious, but Libya wasn't free. It was a country left in limbo, ripe for control by a new power. The real question now was, who would hold the key to Libya's future? The British quickly took control of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, while the French occupied Fezzan. Some factions wanted Libya divided, others pushed for full independence, and in 1949, the world watched as the United Nations intervened, making history by passing a resolution that would pave the way for Libya's independence. Yet it wasn't a swift process. On December 24, 1951, after 2 years of diplomatic wrangling, Libya officially became an independent kingdom under King Idris, a respected figure from the Sanusi religious order. He was seen as the glue that could hold Libya's fractured regions together. But Idris had one massive problem. Libya was one of the poorest nations on earth, with an economy in shambles and little hope for growth. Then in 1959, something extraordinary happened. Libya struck black gold. Oil was discovered in vast quantities beneath the desert. This wasn't just any oil, it was enough to transform Libya into an oil-rich monarchy almost overnight. The game had changed, and the future of Libya would never be the same. Libya's newfound oil wealth had set the stage for a dramatic transformation. Western companies flooded the country, eager to get a slice of the desert riches. The government, flush with cash, launched ambitious construction projects to improve the quality of life for its people. Yet, with prosperity came inflation, and the cost of living soared. Corruption reared its ugly head, and the shine of Libya's newfound wealth began to dull. King Idris, once hailed as the unifier, struggled to maintain control. Not everyone was thrilled with how he handled the nation's prosperity. His close ties to the West, particularly his support for foreign oil companies, were raising serious concerns. His failure to take a stand against Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War was the final straw. The cracks were showing, and discontent was growing fast. The winds of Arab nationalism were sweeping across the Middle East. Egypt had Nasser, Iraq had its revolution, and in Libya, there was a young military officer watching closely, biding his time. His name, Muammar Gaddafi. In 1963, Gaddafi entered the Libyan military army. Under the radar, he built a small but loyal group of young officers who shared his radical vision for the future. Inspired by figures like Egypt's Nasser, he dreamed of throwing off foreign influence and making Libya a powerful, independent force in the Arab world. By September 1969, King Idris was in Turkey for medical treatment. It was Gaddafi's moment. One swift night, Libya went from monarchy to revolution. Gaddafi seized power, and the country was reborn as a Libyan Arab Republic. Gaddafi's vision for Libya took shape in his manifesto, the Green Book. And by 1977, Libya had a new name, the Great Socialist People Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, a government by the masses. Muammar Gaddafi's rise to power wasn't just about military coups and political maneuvers. His first major shockwave came from Libya's most valuable asset, its oil. Under previous rulers, foreign corporations had a strange hold on Libya's oil wealth. But Gaddafi wasn't having it. He wasn't afraid to take on the Western powers. With a single stroke, Gaddafi expelled foreign military bases from Libyan soil. He renegotiated oil contracts with the big Western companies, demanding a fairer deal. When they all balked, he didn't hesitate. He threatened to nationalize the oil industry. Under immense pressure, the corporations caved, accepting Gaddafi's terms. Almost overnight, Libya's oil revenue soared, transforming the country into one of Africa's wealthiest nations per capita. The living standard of Libyans reached new heights, higher than any other in Africa. With newfound wealth, Gaddafi set his sights on improving his people's lives. free healthcare, free education, and government-provided housing became a reality. Yet not all his policies were without consequence. His ban on commercial property rentals, with the noble goal of providing every Libyan the right to own their home, caused chaos. Housing shortages and a lack of real estate development stifled progress, leaving the country in a precarious situation. But Gaddafi's ambitions stretched far beyond Libya's borders. By the 1980s, he had reimagined himself as Africa's liberator. He dreamed of a United States of Africa, a continent free from the shadow of Western powers. To make that vision a reality, Gaddafi poured resources into African countries, winning allies with his boundless generosity and charisma. But his reach would extend far beyond what he could have imagined. In the 1970s, he set his sights on the mineral-rich Ozo Strip, a contested region along Libya's southern border with Chad. But when he decided to invade Chad, he underestimated the fierce resistance he would face. Backed by France, Chad fought back with brutal determination. What followed was years of grueling desert warfare. In the end, Libya was forced to retreat in disgrace, a crushing blow to Gaddafi's regional aspirations. By the late 1970s and 1980s, Gaddafi's international reputation began to deteriorate. His defiant anti-Western speeches and flamboyant public persona made him a target of Western disdain. Ronald Reagan, US president at that time, coined the infamous nickname Mad Dog of the Middle East. But it was far more than just a catchy phrase. The relationship between US and Libya, once cooperative, soured rapidly. Gaddafi's open support for militant groups around the world, from Palestinian factions to the IRA in Ireland, turned him into a pariah. The US imposed harsh trade restrictions on Libya, and tensions skyrocketed. In 1986, a US bombing raid devastated Tripoli and Benghazi, killing Gaddafi's adopted daughter. The retaliation didn't end there. Just 2 years later, tragedy struck when Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. With evidence linking Libya to the bombing, Gaddafi was accused of orchestrating one of the deadliest acts of terrorism in modern history. Sanctions were imposed, and Libya found itself isolated from the international community, condemned as a rogue state. As the years passed, Gaddafi's paranoia grew. The West remained a constant threat in his eyes, and as he watched Pakistan's nuclear success unfold, he saw a new path to power. In the late 1980s and 1990s, he secretly embarked on a dangerous quest to acquire nuclear weapons. With the help of Abdul Qadir Khan, a Pakistani scientist with ties to the nuclear black market, Gaddafi began purchasing the technology needed to arm his regime, but the world was watching. Despite his best efforts to keep it under wraps, international intelligence got wind of his plans. The West wasn't going to let him go unchecked. The pressure was relentless, and Gaddafi found himself cornered. In a stunning move that shocked the world, Gaddafi reversed course. In the late 1990s, he agreed to dismantle Libya's nuclear program, aiming to restore his standing on the world stage. It wasn't just the nuclear ambitions that he had to give up. Gaddafi also handed over the suspects linked to the infamous Pan Am Flight 103 bombing, a gesture meant to prove his sincerity. To make matters worse, Libya also accepted the International Court of Justice ruling on the disputed Ozo Strip, conceding the territory to Chad. This dramatic shift paid off. By 2003, Libya was on a path toward reintegration into the international community. The United Kingdom, once a bitter foe, restored diplomatic ties, and the United Nations lifted sanctions. In a remarkable turn of events, Gaddafi found himself collaborating with Western intelligence agencies on counter-terrorism. Western leaders, including British Prime Minister Tony Blair, visited Tripoli. The Libyan leader was back in the game. International oil companies returned, eager to ink new lucrative deals. Gaddafi had come full circle. As Gaddafi worked to repair his image on the world stage, he was also silently building an empire of his own. Outwardly, he championed socialism and a life of simplicity, but behind closed doors, the truth was far different. Gaddafi and his family enjoyed unimaginable wealth, luxurious villas, private yachts, and priceless art collections. Billions were stashed away in foreign accounts, hidden from the public eye, as the leader of Libya lived a life of opulence. Meanwhile, the people of Libya, enduring poverty and repression, began to grow restless. Political freedom was a distant dream, and any opposition was swiftly crushed. Dissenters faced imprisonment, torture, or even death, with public executions becoming disturbingly common. So when the winds of revolution swept through the Arab world in 2011, igniting uprisings in Tunisia, Egypt, and Syria, Libya was not left untouched. Protests erupted, fueled by anger and frustration, and Gaddafi's response was brutal. The world could no longer ignore what was happening, as Gaddafi's forces closed in on Benghazi. Fear of a massacre gripped the country. The international community, still haunted by past failures to prevent genocides in Rwanda and Bosnia, had no choice but to act. In March 2011, the UN passed Resolution 1973, authorizing NATO to intervene in Libya. The coalition, led by the US and its allies, swiftly mobilized. A no-fly zone was established. NATO bombed Gaddafi's military infrastructure, and the rebels, empowered by the support, began reclaiming lost cities. In a matter of months, Gaddafi's regime started to crumble. The balance of power was shifting, and the world's attention was now squarely on Libya. Gaddafi's brutal track record was well documented, and his threats to show no mercy to the rebels in Benghazi seemed to justify the intervention. World leaders rallied behind the responsibility to protect R2P doctrine, claiming it was their moral duty to act. As Gaddafi's forces closed in on Benghazi, Obama declared that the US could not remain silent while a ruthless dictator threatened a mass slaughter. But here's where things got murky. While NATO painted this as a purely humanitarian mission, there was undeniable motives lurking behind the surface. Libya wasn't just any country, it was a treasure trove of oil and held immense strategic importance in North Africa. Gaddafi's erratic leadership had already made him a thorn in the side of Western powers, and his unpredictability only added to the tension. Was this really about saving lives, or was it about securing control of one of the world's richest oil reserves? The intervention was framed as a moral imperative, but the stakes were far higher than simply protecting civilians. The official narrative was clear. NATO was intervening in Libya to protect civilians from Gaddafi's brutal crackdown. But as the dust settled and the world's attention remained fixed on the moral justification, whispers from internal communications began to tell a different story. A 2011 memo sent by the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, suggested that the motivations behind NATO's actions were far more complex and self-serving than publicly acknowledged. France, in particular, had its own set of interests. According to intelligence briefing, French President Nicolas Sarkozy wasn't just concerned with humanitarian rights. He saw an opportunity to secure Libya's vast oil reserves and gain leverage over Gaddafi's immense gold supply. Sarkozy feared that Gaddafi's financial power would challenge France's influence in the region. It wasn't just all about oil though. Sarkozy's push for intervention had domestic implications. He sought to bolster his political standing at home by appearing strong on the international stage. But France wasn't the only player with an agenda. NATO, under the leadership of Obama, Cameron, and Sarkozy, had its own reasons for intervening. There was a desire to reassert Western dominance in the region amidst the Arab Spring and to safeguard Libyan resources that were crucial to global interests. The Arabs' laid surprising requests for a no-fly zone provided crucial political cover, allowing the intervention to be framed as a regional effort rather than Western imposition. Countries like Qatar and the UAE, no strangers to Gaddafi's controversial rule, threw their support behind NATO, signaling that the Gulf's rival also wanted him gone. With so many enemies circling, Gaddafi's fate seemed inevitable. The night sky over Tripoli erupted on March 19, 2011, as NATO launched one of its heaviest air assaults on Libya's capital since the conflict began. More than 20 airstrikes lit up the city, the thunderous booms reverberating across the streets. This marked the beginning of Operation Odyssey Dawn, a US-led mission designed to cripple Gaddafi's regime and prevent the looming massacre in Benghazi. French fighter jets were the first to strike. The first wave of attacks saw the United States, France, and Britain working in lockstep. But within days, NATO took full control of the operation, formalizing the transition with Operation Unified Protector on March 31st. Now, NATO was in charge of both the air campaign and naval blockade, with command centers set up in Italy coordinating the relentless strikes. However, the US approach was different from past interventions, with Iraqi's quagmire still fresh in their minds. The Obama administration was determined to avoid another long-term entanglement. While the US initially provided critical support, cruise missile strikes, intelligence, electronic warfare, and drones, the mission's primary responsibility shifted to NATO allies after the first week. Obama's strategy was to provide key assistance while letting Europe lead the charge. For the next few months, American drones continued to patrol the skies, and US jets struck targets when necessary. But the lion's share of the bombing raids were carried out by European forces, signaling a shift in the balance of power within the NATO alliance. By April 2011, NATO's mission in Libya had taken a new shape. France and Britain became the faces of the alliance, while a unified NATO command directed the operations. Over the course of the conflict, 8 countries contributed militarily, including Canada, Italy, Belgium, and even 3 Arab states, Jordan, Qatar, and the UAE. Fighter jets and support aircraft from these nations bolstered the efforts. For 7 intense months, NATO unleashed a relentless campaign, flying over 26,500 sorties, with nearly 9,700 of them being strike missions. They targeted thousands of Libyan military assets, from Gaddafi's air force to his heavy artillery. However, despite the scale of the operation, NATO refrained from sending ground troops into Libya. This air power heavy approach proved effective, quickly disabling Gaddafi's air capabilities and destroying his stockpiles of weaponry. The once unmatched military might of Libya was systematically dismantled, creating an opening for the rebels. By August 2011, with NATO's air support, the rebels surged towards Tripoli, and the fall of Gaddafi's regime seemed imminent. On October 20th, 2011, Gaddafi's flight ended in his hometown of Sirte, where rebel forces found him hiding. In an agonizing moment of violence, they dragged him through the streets and executed him, capturing every gruesome detail on camera. The world watched and many celebrated, feeling that Libya was finally free. But as Gaddafi's brutal regime fell, a new question loomed. Was Libya truly liberated, or had the intervention left the country on the brink of chaos. The mission may have been accomplished, but the real challenge was just beginning. The moment Gaddafi was gone, Libya was left in anarchy. No central government, no functioning institution, no army. Just a chaotic mix of militias, all armed and ready to fight. What was supposed to be a moment of liberation quickly devolved into something far darker. The National Transitional Council took power with high hopes, but those hopes were quickly dashed. Oil exports, which had halted during the war, resumed, and NATO countries, along with the UN, recognized the new leadership. But beneath the surface of optimism, cracks were forming fast. NATO's intervention had left a critical void. There was no peacekeeping force to stabilize the country, and the rebels who had toppled Gaddafi didn't disarm, they multiplied. Militias, each with their own agenda, spread across the country, including the capital, Tripoli. Arms depot had been looted, and the National Transitional Council was powerless to contain the armed factions that had just helped defeat the dictator. By 2012, Libya had descended into a battlefield, not just between rival factions, but between entire governments. As destruction reigned, ISIS capitalized on the power vacuum, followed by an influx of foreign mercenaries from Russia, Turkey, Egypt, and the UAE, all picking sides in a war that had no clear winner. Libya was no longer just a failed state. It had become a full-blown war zone, staggering on the edge of total collapse. After Gaddafi's fall, Libya became a breeding ground for some of the darkest criminal enterprises imaginable. While the world celebrated his removal, no one was talking about what happened next. Migrants from across Africa, desperately trying to reach Europe, found themselves trapped in Libya. But this wasn't just a failed migration route. Libya turned into the epicenter of human trafficking. Thousands were sold into slavery in horrifying modern-day auctions. In 2017, CNN uncovered footage of people being openly sold in Tripoli. Yet shockingly, the world just moved on, ignoring the suffering. But it wasn't just people being trafficked. In the destruction that followed Gaddafi's collapse, smuggling rings flourished, and the country's vast arsenal of weapons became a dangerous commodity. The weapons looted from the Gaddafi's armories flooded the region, triggering further violence. In early 2013, the UN issued a dire warning about the alarming rates of arms smuggling from Libya. These weapons, everything from small arms to anti-aircraft missiles, empowered militant groups across Africa and the Middle East, igniting conflicts in Mali, Syria, and beyond.